there, welcome. Hi, how are you? Nice to see you. You guys
Betty, hello. I know, I wanted to thank you for the postcard. I was going to write you a note and then somehow.
I know.
In the name of Basque Village, we welcome you. My name is Marcia Friedman. I'm on the board of Basque Village, and I'm part of the arts and culture team that have organized this event. There are lots of people to thank, so please bear with me. The other members of the arts and culture team, Rochelle Lefkowitz, Betty Webster, Joanne Carter, Irene Marcus, and Sigrid Duisberg. They all work very hard to put on these events. Thank you. Our videographer today is Craig Griffith, and our photographer is Nancy. There she is, taking pictures. And Michelle Lefkowitz is going to be our print reporter. We want to thank our co-sponsors, the Epworth United Methodist Church, and in particular, Susan Jardine, who helped us organize this, and Paul Maston for his technical, without which not technical support. And there are many volunteers who have signed you in, who will be walking around with pencils and cards for the Q&A following this. They are Eileen Levin, Hannah Kuppelman, Dagmar Friedman, Laurie Goldman, and Ken Peterson. I also want to let you know that our next event on April the 26th is going to be rather special, like they all are actually. They are. With Adam Hochschild, who is going to be talking about the ways in which the First World War made our country worse. I think it's going to be extremely interesting. As you know, Adam Hochschild is an historian, a very well-known historian, and part of our community, so we're very pleased to have him. I want to introduce Frances, and there's a great deal to say about Frances, but I'm going to try to keep it a little bit brief, but not entirely brief. Frances has produced and directed and shot documentary films over a period of 30 years. With Deborah Hoffman, they produced and made the film Long Night's Journey into Day, South Africa's Search for Truth and Reconciliation. That film won the Grand Jury Award for Best Documentary at Sundance in 2000 and was nominated for an Academy Award in 2001. And it has been exhibited widely in festivals worldwide, including the Jerusalem Film Festival, where it won the Spirit of Freedom Award. Frances was nominated along with Dees Mosbacher for an Academy Award for Best Documentary Short for Straight from the Heart, which documented the relationship and explored the relationships between straight parents and their gay children. Frances has produced and directed and was cinematographer for many, many more films. And if I were to name them, you would be here for a long time, and we would never be able to hear Frances, so we're not going to do that. But it includes the one you're going to see today, which I think was your first film, or among the first films, Greetings from Washington, D.C., which documents the first ever lesbian and gay march on Washington for civil rights in 1979. And before I give you Frances, I want to tell you a little personal story. I think you may or may, I'm sure you remember this. In 2004, the political leaders of the Israeli peace movement, who were out of power, and the peace activists within the Palestinian Liberation Organization managed to sit down together and actually come to a full and complete peace agreement. Of course, they were not in power, and so it was a non-binding peace agreement, but it was an agreement that actually solved and resolved all of the issues: borders, refugees, settlements, territory, Jerusalem, the whole 9 yards. And there was a signing ceremony to be held in Geneva. I was invited to that ceremony, and I had the chutzpah to ask Frances my Academy Award-winning friend, if she would come with us, I think on your own nickel, if I remember correctly, if she would come with us to photograph. And she, to my great surprise, said yes, with great alacrity. The result of that, and the footage that Frances shot was edited by another Academy Award winner, the editor Veronica Silver, who is here somewhere. Veronica, where are you? There you are. And is available on YouTube if you ever want to see it. It's called The Spirit of Geneva. So with that, and very happily, I present Frances.
Thank you, Marcia, and thank you for actually shaving a few years off my life. It's actually been 40 years that I've been making films. When I stopped making films a few years ago, actively doing random documentary films, a friend of mine said to me, well, somebody should make a film about you. And I thought, no. There's a reason I'm behind the camera. And anyway, I think, it gets a little bit meta to start making films about filmmakers. So I was not interested in that idea at all. But I did start thinking that perhaps there were some stories that I had to tell about the films that I had made over the years. And about 2 years ago, my dear friend Annie Hershey died. We had a memorial for her in this very space here. And it got me thinking about a story about Annie when I was in Washington, D.C., filming the first ever Gay and Lesbian March for Gay and Lesbian Rights in 1979. And so that became the sort of genesis of the story that I'm going to read today. And at that point, 1979, I was still a pretty newbie filmmaker. I had been making films for a few years. I started making films in Malawi with my then husband, who happens to be here today, what year was that? 1969. To really get into my own filmmaking work started when I made a film called In the Best Interest of the Children, which is a film about lesbian mothers and child custody. And shortly after that, because of making that film, at the same time, Rob Epstein and Brock Silver and several other filmmakers were making the film Word Is Out. And we were kind of like the gay filmmakers of the Bay Area, and we all got to know each other pretty well. And one day Rob called me and he said, so there's some filmmakers in New York who have contacted me, and they want to make a film about the first Gay and Lesbian March on Washington, D.C., and would you join us? And of course, just as I did with Marcia, I jumped at the opportunity. I, again, had to sort of pay my own way to get there, but it was worth every bit of it. That being said, I'm going to read what I have written about that experience on that autumn day in 1979. October 14th, 1979. We all sleep on the floor of the young journalist that night, or don't sleep. Our sleeping bags jumbled here and there in hasty disarray. Few of us in them, too excited, some of us meeting for the first time. Too much to discuss, too much heady importance, too much needing to prep our gear and to plan our production strategy in the few hours before dawn. We are an ad hoc, thrown together, ragtag group of lesbian and gay fledgling filmmakers who, having realized the historic importance of the event we're about to film, scrounge cameras and tripods and sound gear from wherever we can. I, as the proud owner of the new 16mm camera, am perhaps valued for my gear as much as my skills. We fly from San Francisco, take trains from New York, 5 of us, Lucy, Greta, Terry, Rob, and me, Rob being the only one I already know. and we form a loose production collective in order to capture the first ever March on Washington for lesbian and gay rights. We recruit whatever friends we can to help. I'm surprised to find Annie there in the kitchen, having just flown in from California with a friend. She is already an accomplished filmmaker that I know and respect. She's not part of our crew. She apparently knows the same young journalist and has found herself a spot on the floor, or maybe, being a significant 5 years older, a coveted bed upstairs. I approach her with enthusiasm and shyness and ask her if she would like to join our production team and do some shooting with us the next day, flattering her with my admiration for her work. I'm not offering her a job. None of us are getting paid. Our expenses so far are out of our own meager pockets. Annie sweetly turns me down, explaining that she really just wants to experience and be part of the march without the mediating scrim of the camera between her and the moment. Again, the internal dilemma of the filmmaker, the documentarian, the journalist. Our compelling urgency to record the moment denies us the moment. But for me, in this moment, there is no dilemma. For me, this moment, my way of experiencing it, is all about filming it. It is about this tight cadre of new friends and our sense of mission. We leave the house before dawn, gear prepped, assignments clear. Some of us are interviewing marchers. Others are capturing the broad sweep of the crowd from high vantage points. We have assistants lugging heavy tripods and precious cans of celluloid film that we stop to load into emptied magazines periodically. We film judiciously, sparely. The film is gold and not to be squandered. We split up to our assigned posts with a few spotty walkie-talkies as our only means of communication in this pre-cell phone era. The day cements my identity as a filmmaker, being seen as a filmmaker at a large public event of my community. I relish my assignment to be on the stage, filming the speakers and performers, a spot where I am very visible. My ego soars. When not on stage, I am atop the press platform, high above the sea of 250,000 queers, getting my shot, feeling important. Only later do I find myself wishing I had spent more time down in the crowd, framing the faces and the feeling of the fledgling newfound power and sense of political urgency. 250,000 lesbians, gay men, Nelly queens and bull dykes, in feather boas and business suits, in clown costumes and leather, in sequins and leather shirts, all demanding our rights. But in the moment, I am ecstatic to be above the fray, to be seen, powerful Amazon woman, 20-pound camera on my shoulder, striding the stage, playing my part in telling our story. For some 12 hours, from dawn until dusk on that autumn day in Washington, D.C., I ply the streets and the stages, never stopping to eat or to drink or to pee, only taking the camera from my shoulder long enough to load a fresh magazine of film or let my assistant carry as we run through the crowds to a new location. I'm 35 years old and I am doing exactly what I want to be doing, being exactly who I want to be. It is an exhausting, exhilarating, glorious day. I am home. From that day, we untangle back into our separate lives. Lucy takes our unruly footage and crafts it into a delightful postcard of a film that gives the world a glimpse of what happened that day when queers from across the country came to Washington, D.C. for the first time as openly proud lesbians and gay men to demand our rights. Harvey Milk, the first openly gay elected official, a San Francisco supervisor, had been assassinated the year before. His rallying cry had been for all of us to come out, to just come out. And so here we were in our nation's capital, as out as we could be, and euphorically showing ourselves to each other and the world on film and television. We We are there that day in Washington, D.C., full of innocence and exuberance, not knowing the wave that is about to engulf us. AIDS is about to wash over us, taking out many of the best and the brightest, and the most marginal, the most vulnerable. Ronald Reagan is about to become our president. The wave hits. We watch a disease erode our community, and I am no longer working on films about our vitality and our nascent political power and our future, but now it is about a terrifying illness and death. Camera in hand, I witness vibrant young men turn into old men in a matter of weeks. Friends at the prime of life, at the height of careers, wither and die. 1987. Once again, I am in Washington, D.C. behind a camera. I am 40 feet in the air in the tiny basket of a cherry picker crane, filming a quilt spread across the mall, filling the space that 8 years earlier was animated with people. Now each panel of the quilt embodies someone who has died. I am working that day for the film Common Threads, documenting the first display of the full, at that time, named Project AIDS Memorial Quilt. Once again, I am there with Rob, but now he is a filmmaker with an Oscar to his name and a co-director and a budget for things like cherry picker cranes and a professional crew and hotel rooms. I am one small element of a big production. From my vantage point above the crowd, each patch of the quilt we are filming is a fragment of a grief-stricken whole that stretches on and across the entirety of the mall. The individual patches are as colorful, creative, and unique as the individuals they represent, sewn in love and in sorrow, both distinct and collective, intensified by a callous President Reagan who chose to look the other way. I wonder how many that were there on that glorious fall day 8 years before, pumping fists and laughing and holding hands and kissing and chanting and feeling defiant, or perhaps venturing out of their closets for the first time and feeling terrified and safe all at once. How many are now reduced to a patch on the ground below me? The satin and boas, the sequins and denim, the lace and leather that they wore that day, now sewn into the cloth of individual and collective grieving. Standing behind my camera, high on the precarious, chilly little platform of the cherry picker that day, experiencing the color and the sadness spread below me, hearing the endless list of names being read all day long of those represented by each panel of the vast quilt. I feel starkly alone, yet right where I am meant to be.
California, San Francisco, and Berkeley. And Berkeley. I have a lot of friends.
So, there are people on either side of the room with pencils and cards for your questions. Some of you may already have questions. If you do, please pass them to the people on the side of the aisle. And Francis, why don't you take center stage, and if you need a chair, I think you should probably move it, but when you need it. So while we're waiting for the first questions to come up, I was going to ask you to keep us busy. If you would say something, I would really like this. If you would say something about what it was like to be in South Africa just after the beginning of the peace and reconciliation process had begun, and making a film about that.
Okay, that's a little change of
It is a little change of pace.
but what I guess is similar for me, if I try to make any kind of parallel, is when we first arrived in South Africa in 1997, there was an incredible amount of positive energy, excitement in the air, and once the African National Congress and Nelson Mandela had become the leaders of the country, and there was just a sense of what democracy was bringing to South Africa at that point, and it was a fantastic time to come into South Africa. It was the first time I'd been there. I'd spent a lot of time in other places in Africa making films, but it was my first time there. And to get that sense of energy and engagement, and I mean, you know, you get in a taxi cab, you're in a cafe, you're in somebody's home, you're anywhere, and the conversation is about what's happening in the country. And, you know, people fight about it, they talk about it, but everybody was engaged in such a wonderful way. And sort of in the way that the way I felt we were back there in Washington, D.C. in 1979, that same kind of engagement, excitement, belief in the future, if you will, was very much the case when we first went to South Africa.
I also just wanted to say that, you know, in 2020, it's pretty amazing to have it be so normal for queer people, for us to just be out without any thought about it. And it's really about what happened in 1979 that's made that possible, and everything that all of you have done in the documentary film work, this film and many others, to normalize what it is to be gay. So,
Can I just add to that? That's true here, of course. That's true in California, it's true in many places in the United States, but it sure isn't true in Uganda, and it sure isn't true in a lot of places in the world where being gay can get you killed.
thank you for the reminder, yes. So, the questions from you. Francis, what was your impression of the political climate in D.C. at the time of the march?
One little example that I can remember is that the march went by the steps of the Daughters of the American Revolution, the DAR, and we wanted to go up on those steps with our cameras to film, and they would not allow us to come up on those steps. The DAR did not want to have queers up on the steps. So that's just a little hint of what the what the atmosphere was like that I can remember specifically. But also I think that, kind of in general at that point, there were not a whole lot of elected officials that were coming out and joining us on the stage or in any way acknowledging our existence there at that time. I mean, not that it's much better now, but it was definitely the case then.
Was the percentage of black people in the march the same as the percentage in the film? And were there other minorities present? Did you know?
There were a lot of minorities at the march, for sure. I mean, I think that probably just about every group that exists in this country was in some way represented there at the march. And I think, as one woman says, there was a Third World Caucus that happened, or Third World Conference that happened that same weekend prior to the march, which meant that there were a whole lot of African Americans, Latinos, Latinx at the march because they had come for that conference.
This is an interesting question. How did gay and lesbian, bi and trans filmmakers support themselves financially in those early days?
Well, I for a long time supported myself when I was still living in Los Angeles, I supported myself working on some really bad, low-budget, B sort of type films, so I couldn't stand it anymore. But that's what I did for a long time. I was a sound person, a PA, whatever. But those films were pretty soul-sucking kinds of films. But I think a lot of people, or they worked in public television, it was possible to find jobs, and maybe you had to be not entirely out in some of those cases. But it was always a challenge.
Could you speak about your philosophy of filmmaking? What's important to you and what you value most? Wow, that's a little question.
Well, filmmaking is very hard. It's very expensive. It takes everything you've got in order to do it. And so, number one, you can't do it if you're not passionate about the thing that you are filming, about the very act of filmmaking, but also about the subject matter. Actually, one of the reasons that I don't make films anymore is that it's, first of all, so much work. I mean, I did so many films that took me all over the world, and film gear is heavy. It's getting lighter all the time. You can now film on your iPhone if you want. But at the point that I was doing it was heavy. Carrying all those cases everywhere, in and out, through customs in many different countries was really hard. But I found that I no longer had that passion for a story that was going to get me through all of the hard times, because there's never not really hard times with any of these films. And the other thing is, because it's expensive and time-consuming and hard and wonderful, mind you. I mean, as you tell from what I wrote, I loved doing what I do. But I felt like the films that I made had to be of some importance. They had to have some resonance or meaning beyond myself, and hopefully were films that would make a difference to people in the world, that they would see it and it would maybe cause some sort of shift. That's probably the single most important part. But I'll add one more thing to that, which is part of my philosophy as a filmmaker has to do with being a documentary filmmaker, because I feel like the wonderful thing about documentary film is that you're not going out and filming people who aren't interesting. You're going out and filming people who are, for whatever reason. And I felt like it was such a privilege always to be in places where I got to spend time with, talk to, and meet people who having the camera, having the filmmaker hat on was a calling card for me for entree into some really wonderful situations.
Here's a question that I know the answer to, but please answer it. Are you considering publishing the piece you read? I loved it.
Well, let's see, I don't have a publisher. I don't even have a book proposal. And I'm probably about halfway through what I would need in order to publish it. I've written, I think, about 30,000 words, something like that. So I've got a ways to go, but my intention, my plan is definitely to publish it. If anybody knows any publishers out there, talk to me.
How do you research your films?
Well, I think research is one of the best parts of almost anything, whether I'm discovering it now as I'm writing. It's so much fun to research. I mean, it's almost too much fun. You can get, totally lost in research forever and ever. And of course, it's pretty easy now compared to how it used to be. I mean, even when we were making the film about South Africa that Marcia referred to, which was in the late 70s, Google didn't really exist in the way that it did now. And so research was oftentimes spending a lot of time on the phone, 10 time zones away to people in South Africa. And yet, nonetheless, I do always find that a really one. I mean, mostly research involves talking to a lot of people. I would say. Another film that I did in the early, like in 1995, was a film called Skin Deep, which is about race relations in the country. And I spent a lot of time researching that film, and that mostly consisted of going around to college campuses and talking to literally hundreds of students at different campuses. And again, I felt like it was such a privilege to be able to do that.
And the last question, unless there are more that you have, has every state that has sodomy laws repealed them? I don't know if you know the answer to that. I don't.
I don't know the answer to that, but Ellie, you're nodding your head. Do you know?
Well, I know Texas finally repealed theirs, so.
That's
Were they the last?
I don't think so. I think there's still like 16 left.
16. Okay.
Really?
Wow.
Wow. Okay, we still have work to do, don't we, folks? Yes, we definitely do.
Well, Frances, thank you very, very much for the film, for your life, for other questions.
It was too hard to write. I started writing. It was too hard to write.
Could you stand up?
Are you kidding?
Please, so we can hear you.
I can speak louder. I don't want to go stand up, but I'm just kind of struck by the, how in '79, so many diverse groups came together, and you were able to really capture that on the film. And what struck me was how interesting it would be to try to integrate the different cross-cultural groups, and not just with ethnicity and things like that, but we talked the part where the African American women, Black women, were talking about how their experience as a heterosexual and the oppression, the kinds of oppression maybe they face. I know that not many Asian people, in comparison, probably joined and came out in that march, but it would be very interesting to me. First of all, it was interesting how people came together and were so unified in that march. And then secondly, just kind of adding to that, how, if you talk about, if you're talking about, men of color versus women of color versus white feminists and feminists, I mean, you've heard it all before, I'm sure, but I think the stories would be very interesting. And I wondered if you ever kind of thought about expanding on those individual stories and integrating it into some sort of a work.
Well, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to get somebody else.
Because you were able to mobilize.
Yeah.
I think oftentimes there's so much division in terms of
Yeah.
what people think are important because of their background.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this film was made to kind of show the unity of that moment, which is not to say that there was not a whole lot of division that was happening You know, I just recently was going back and reading some stuff about the first the West Coast Lesbian Conference at UCLA in 1972, because I was there videotaping that. And there was such controversy about a transgender woman named Beth Elliott who came to that conference to speak. And she was, I mean, it really totally divided the conference. And that happened then, and it's still happening now. And, you know, one of the things you don't really see in 1979 at this march is much having to do with transgender issues.
Right, so how do we bridge those gaps? I guess that's interesting to me.
Well, that's really a question for all of us, isn't it?
Yeah. Or just need to bring that awareness.
Yeah, exactly.
Aren't there enough people in this audience with friends or children or someone who could write those kinds of stories and encourage a lot of them to begin with those kinds of films?
I mean, I feel like, you know, there is a lot of effort towards intersectionality these days. I think that that's, I mean, I was struck watching this film the first time I saw it as, oh, you know, we didn't just invent intersectionality, it existed back then too. It maybe didn't get called that, but it definitely existed then. And I do think that there are efforts, and it's always going to be a challenge. It's always going to be threatening. It's always going to be something that people resist or have to talk about or fight about. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, as long as the conversations happen, then they happen in some kind of respectful way.
I'm Felix. I'm wondering if you can say what the plans are, if any, to actually make this a film available with subtitles, because I missed a lot of it, and what kind of finances are involved, because in these days of crowdsourcing, it should be possible to raise money to get this thing out pretty quickly.
Yeah, thank you for that question, actually. And again, my apologies for the quality of this DVD and the sound. I mean, it was the best we have at this point. But we're actually in conversation, Lucy and Rob and I have been in conversation with the UCLA Film Archives about doing a restoration of this film. And so if that happens, then there will be very good digital copy of it that will have good sound and will have, you know, will look a lot better, you know, will be sharp. And, you know, because the original negative of this film looks great. But at least we hope it does. They're going to evaluate it and tell us, you know, how it looks. But then, yes, then there will be a question of raising the money to do that. Sometimes the film archives themselves put some of the money into that. Also, Outfest, which is a gay film festival in Los Angeles, is interested in being a part of that because they want to perhaps have this film be part of the film that would tour the country. So, but thank you for the question because it's an important one.
I just wanted to say something because some of the people here from Ashby Village may not know about the wonderful film Frances made with Deborah Hoffman, Complaints of a Dutiful Daughter. I know that film has changed people's lives. People who are able to see it and have a different view of how you could relate to Alzheimer's. And so I just hope that maybe Ashby Village would like to show that at some point so that we can have that, a different kind of conversation about
Excellent idea.
also.
Over here.
Hi, Frances. It's so wonderful to see this work. I've never seen it before. And one of the things that really struck me about it was the emotional immediacy of the people. There was shyness, there was pride, there was just a lot of emotional texture there. And just from the production side of that, what was it like to ask people for permission to appear? There were some really lovely intimate moments where people were kissing. I get that this was the first national gathering like this. What was that like to actually get people to agree to appear? And what was the emotional experience of it?
That's a good question. I mean, other than the people that you saw that had bags on their heads, people, and they had bags on their heads for a good reason, I'm sure. But everybody knew that they were there to be out. And so that threshold had already been crossed. So that, it just felt like it was such a moment of, we're all here and we're all queer, and isn't that wonderful? So to go up to somebody with a microphone and ask them those kind of questions, they wanted to answer them. And I mean, you probably saw at the end, we had those kind of more set up things where people, that was, thank you Peter there, that was his idea, for people to sort of have their little postcard moment. Then that gave people an opportunity to volunteer to be in front of the camera. And I can't really remember this now, it was a long time ago, but I'm sure there were people that we approached that said, no, I don't want to do this. But many, many, many people, many more than actually ended up in the film, were very happy to be on camera.
I was really, I don't know why, finally, I was really struck by the power of a movie to reach somebody as a medium, so much more than a book or, and I'm working with kids in classrooms, and so many educators have used your work, to start discussion, to have all that going on. But also, I was thinking my sister, who didn't come out until her mid-50s. Boy, would she have loved to have been sitting here next to me watching this film. It isn't just teaching for everybody else, it's also the self-recognition for the people that are there. It's just an enormously powerful teaching tool.
And I have to say, at the point that we made this film, it was really about that last part that you're talking about your sister. And to be able to see ourselves and see each other and to celebrate ourselves and each other. And this film, in the 2 years after it was finished, made it, was probably at every gay film festival that there was in the country, and, there weren't a lot, but there were enough. And, got seen in a lot, but mostly in gay communities, not so much in schools or out in the straight world or something.
How important it is for straight kids to be able to see that.
Yeah, exactly.
I just want to thank you for documenting those times. For someone who's here in Berkeley and since 1970, and it was such a heady time for those of us coming out and just feminism in general and feeling like we were changing the world. And film is such a wonderful medium for that. I've often thought, all the Berkeley Women's Music Night, all these wonderful, very high times that we've all had together and fed on each other. So thank you so much for that. And if I may, I'd like to make a pitch for a film that's coming out that was 15 years in the making. It's going to be at the New Parkway on March 24th. I think just a one-night show called Left on Pearl. And it's a fabulous. Sorry, it's called.
Use the microphone.
Sorry. It's a pitch for a film that's coming to the Parkway on March 24th called Left on Pearl. And it is about the women taking over a vacant Harvard building back in 1971 to create a women's center, and that is still there. And it's a fabulous film, and there's interviews with the women who took it over now, and then that wonderful, wonderful archival footage from those days. So again, more documentation of just a very heady time, and now at a time that a lot of us are discouraged, it's a wonderful thing to feel that again. Thanks.
Well, and the other thing is, it was much harder to document those things than it is now. Now everybody pulls out their cell phone to document everything, right? But it was, pulling out your 16mm camera and loading it with, 10 minutes worth of film, and hoping you got the thing. It was a very, very different moment.
I just wanted to say, I looked it up and it's 14 states. That's still not fun.
Thank you. Other questions, comments? I really appreciate you all being here today. It was wonderful for me to, I have to say, this is the first time I've publicly read something that I've written.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you for all the volunteers that made this possible.